The transformation of a world from imperial bastion to chaos stronghold follows patterns as varied as they are horrifying. Some fall quickly, overwhelmed by demonic invasion when warp rifts tear reality asunder. Others succumb gradually, their populations corrupted from within by hidden cults who worship the dark gods in secret until the moment arrives to throw off their masks. Planetary governors make pacts with chaos in exchange for power, sacrificing their entire populations to dark entities. Space Marine chapters turn traitor, claiming worlds as their own and reshaping them according to their twisted ideologies. Warp storms engulf entire systems, trapping them in a hellish limbo where the boundaries between material space and the immaterium dissolve. Regardless of how they fall, these worlds share common characteristics that mark them as places forsaken by all hope. The very fabric of reality becomes unstable, subject to the psychic emanations that bleed through from the warp. Physical laws cease to apply with any consistency. Gravity might reverse without warning. Time flows at different rates in different locations, creating pockets where centuries pass in moments or single heartbeats stretch into eternities. The landscape itself becomes mutable, reshaping according to the dominant emotions and thoughts of those who inhabit it. Mountains of skulls rise overnight. Rivers run with blood that burns like acid. Forests grow from twisted flesh rather than wood. The sky might display impossible colours that drive observers mad, or split open to reveal the roiling chaos of the warp itself. The inhabitants of demon worlds exist in conditions that mock everything human civilization once represented. Those unfortunate enough to be born into such places know nothing but suffering and service to dark masters. Those captured and brought to these worlds as slaves discover depths of horror they never imagined possible. The majority of mortals on demon worlds serve not as warriors, but as fuel for the endless engines of chaos. They toil in conditions that would kill unaugmented humans within hours, sustained only by the corrupting energies that permeate their environment. They worship at profane shrines, their prayers feeding the power of entities that view them with less regard than a human might show an insect. The slave populations of chaos worlds number in the billions across the Eye of Terror and beyond. Captured during raids on Imperial space, bred in hellish farms, or descended from those who fell to chaos generations ago, they form the foundation upon which demon worlds function. Their lives hold no value beyond what service they can provide before death claims them. The lucky ones die quickly, their bodies consumed in rituals or their blood spilled to please the blood god. The unlucky survive, trapped in cycles of torment that can last for subjective centuries even if objective time measures only years. On worlds claimed by Khorne, the blood god, violence permeates every aspect of existence. These places ring with the constant clash of weapons, the screams of the dying and the bellowing war cries of those who worship through slaughter. Entire continents serve as fighting pits where slaves are forced into gladiatorial combat for the amusement of their masters. Those who prove skilled enough might earn slightly better treatment, perhaps even the dubious privilege of fighting for a chaos warband rather than dying anonymously in the pits. Most simply perish, their skulls added to the mountains that dominate the landscape of every Khornate world. Blood flows like rivers, collected in vast reservoirs that feed dark purposes. The very ground becomes saturated with it, turning everything red under skies that burn with eternal rage. The slaves on Khornate worlds live brief, brutal existences defined entirely by violence. Children are separated from parents and trained to kill before they can form words. The weak are culled without mercy, fed to mutant beasts or simply executed as offerings. Those who survive to adulthood know only how to fight, their entire worldview shaped by the endless need for blood. Some embrace this existence fully, becoming willing cultists who revel in slaughter. Others maintain some fragment of their humanity, hiding their reluctance even as they kill to survive. Both groups meet the same fate eventually, dying with weapons in their hands as Khorne demands. Where Slaanesh holds dominion, suffering takes on qualities even more disturbing. The Dark Prince of Pleasure demands sensation in all its forms, pushing mortal minds and bodies beyond any natural limits. These worlds showcase every imaginable excess and perversion, places where the pursuit of experience eclipses all other concerns. Slaves on Slaaneshi worlds endure torments that blend pleasure and pain until the distinction becomes meaningless. They are reshaped by dark science and sorcery. their bodies modified to serve as living artwork or to generate specific sensations for their masters. Some are kept in perpetual states of heightened sensitivity, every touch registering as either ecstasy or agony at the whim of those who own them. The aesthetic horror of Slaaneshi demon worlds manifests in architecture and landscape that embodies twisted beauty. Spires reach toward the sky in impossible curves, their surfaces covered in reliefs that depict acts no sane mind should contemplate. Gardens grow filled with plants that weep narcotic sap, their flowers releasing perfumes that induce hallucinations and dependency. Everything designed to stimulate, to overwhelm, to push mortal senses past their breaking points. The slaves move through this nightmare dressed in garments that expose more than they conceal, their bodies marked with brands and modifications that proclaim their status as property. They learn to anticipate their master's desires, knowing that failure to please results in punishments that can last subjective lifetimes. On one particular Slaaneshi world, documented by Imperial reconnaissance, the entire planet had been reshaped into the form of an enormous humanoid figure, curled in a fetal position and visible from orbit. Its surface writhed with obscene activity, billions of souls trapped in an existence dedicated entirely to feeding their gods' insatiable appetite for sensation. Such places exist beyond the comprehension of unaugmented human minds, their very existence serving as weapons that corrupt those who learn of them. Nurgle's demon worlds present horror of a different nature, equally terrible in their own way. The Plague. God's touch transforms worlds into vast breeding grounds for disease and decay. Everything rots perpetually without ever quite dying, locked in states of decomposition that should be fatal, but somehow sustain a mockery of life. The very air becomes thick with spores and contagion, every breath drawing corruption into mortal lungs. Water runs thick with filth and microorganisms that devour flesh from within. The ground squelches underfoot, composed more of decaying organic matter than solid earth. Yet Nurgle's slaves often endure their suffering with disturbing acceptance, even gratitude. The Plague God offers a twisted comfort to those who embrace his gifts, numbing them to pain even as their bodies fall apart. They wander through landscapes of pestilence with expressions of vacuous contentment, their minds too damaged to comprehend the horror of their existence. Sores cover every inch of exposed flesh, weeping fluids that should kill but instead sustain. Bones show through gaps in rotted meat, yet still they walk and work and worship. Some even achieve a state approaching joy, finding community among fellow sufferers and purpose in spreading Grandfather Nurgle's blessings to new worlds. The slave populations on Plague worlds serve primarily as incubators, their bodies hosting countless diseases that Nurgle's servants cultivate and refine. They are experimented upon, infected with new strains to test their virulence and transmissibility. They labour in vast gardens where toxic fungi grow and plague zombies till soil composed of corpses. Their children are born already infected, destined to live brief lives that amount to nothing more than disease vectors. Death becomes not an ending but a transition, as corpses rise again as plague zombies or dissolve into clouds of infectious spores. Tzeentch, the changer of ways, creates demon worlds that defy understanding more completely than those of any other chaos god. These places exist in states of constant flux, their very nature shifting according to plans only the great conspirator comprehends. Geography becomes meaningless when landmarks might relocate overnight or vanish entirely. Buildings twist into new configurations, their internal spaces larger than their exteriors suggest. The inhabitants themselves change constantly, sprouting new limbs or losing old ones, their flesh rippling with mutation that never stabilizes. Slaves on Tzeentchian worlds suffer the unique torment of never knowing stability or certainty. They might wake one morning to find themselves transformed into something no longer quite human, forced to adapt or die as their bodies rebel against basic biological principles. They are subjected to endless experiments, their genetics and souls twisted by sorcerers who seek forbidden knowledge. Some are transformed into mindless chaos spawn when their flesh can no longer contain the mutations forced upon it. Others maintain their minds even as their bodies become increasingly alien, trapped in awareness of what they're becoming but powerless to stop the changes. The planet of the sorcerers, home to the Thousand Suns Traitor Legion, exemplifies Tzeentchian demon worlds. Psychic phenomena manifest constantly across its surface, thought made briefly solid before dissolving back into possibility. The slave populations include those captured during raids, as well as descendants of servants the Legion acquired over millennia. They dwell in the shadow of crystalline towers where the Thousand Sons practice their dark arts, venturing out only when commanded. Some flee into the hostile wilderness, forming nomadic bands led by Chaos champions risen from their own ranks. Yet even escape offers no salvation, as the entire world exists saturated with warp energy that ensures corruption for all who dwell there. The Hellforges present another category of chaos-controlled world, places where industrial capacity combines with demonic power to produce instruments of war. Zana 2 within the Eye of Terror stands as perhaps the most infamous example, an entire planet given over to demon-possessed machines and infernal industries. Countless millions toil in its world-spanning factories, their bodies broken by endless labour until death provides the only release. The heretics of the Dark Mechanicus who rule such places have long since abandoned their humanity, existing as hybrids of flesh and machine and demon that serve no master but their own twisted desires. The slaves in Hellforges face conditions that reduce them to components in vast industrial processes. They feed raw materials into machines that hunger like living things. They labour at assembly lines that produce demon engines and cursed weaponry. The air they breathe consists more of chemical fumes and metal particles than oxygen, slowly poisoning them even as their labour continues. Mills grind flesh alongside metal, the distinction between biological and mechanical resources long since erased. Those who collapse from exhaustion are simply fed into the machines themselves, their bodies broken down and repurposed as organic components or fuel. The masters of such worlds view their slave populations as renewable resources, to be exploited until exhausted and then replaced. Regular raids into Imperial space provide fresh captives to supplement losses. Breeding programs ensure a steady supply of new workers, children born into bondage and trained from their earliest years to serve the forges. The most valuable slaves might be augmented with cybernetics, transformed into cyborg servitors who can work longer and harder than unmodified humans. Yet even this offers no mercy, only prolonged suffering as their augmented bodies continue functioning long past the point where their minds break. Medrengard, the demon world that serves as the Iron Warrior's fortress home, combines elements of both military bastion and Hellforge. Reconnaissance reports describe it as a bleak prison planet where slaves are worked to death, constructing the endless fortifications that cover its surface. Mountains rise, formed from towers reaching impossible heights, while dungeons penetrate deep into the planet's molten core. Great chaotic warships remain tethered to the tallest towers, like predators chained and waiting. Within those towers and dungeons reside the Iron Warriors themselves, bitter and twisted by 10,000 years of warfare against the Imperium they once served. The slave population on Medrengar exists solely to serve the Legion's needs. They dig tunnels through solid rock, construct walls that stretch across continents, and maintain the war machines that the Iron Warriors deploy in their endless campaigns. They live in cramped, dark spaces where the air grows thick with dust, and the temperature fluctuates between freezing and unbearable heat. Guards watch them constantly, quick to execute any who slow in their work or show signs of rebellion. The privileged few who possess technical skills might earn slightly better treatment, valued for their ability to maintain complex machinery. The rest remain anonymous components in a system that grinds through human life with mechanical efficiency. The Demonkalaba represented perhaps the most horrifying project ever undertaken on Medrengard, a twisted attempt to create new Chaos Space Marines through methods that defy all morality and sanity. Human females were captured and subjected to surgical and sorcerous modifications that transformed them into grotesque incubators. Stolen gene seed from Space Marines was implanted within their wombs, where it would grow into new heretic Astartes over a period of months. The women suffered indescribable agony throughout the process, their bodies stretched and mutated beyond recognition. Most died during the birthing, their purpose fulfilled and their suffering ended. Those who survived would begin the cycle again within days, trapped in a nightmare that only death could end. The process produced Chaos Space Marines, but at costs that staggered even those accustomed to the horrors of the Eye of Terror. The skin for newborn heretic Astartes was harvested from other slaves, stretched to fit their larger frames before the donors were flayed alive, genetic material extracted from corpses fed the growing warriors. The success rate remained low, with many subjects dying or emerging as mindless failures. Yet the project continued until Ultramarines captain Uriel Ventress destroyed it during his time on Medrengard, an act that earned him eternal enmity from the warsmith Honsu, who had overseen the Demonculaba. Sicarus, the demon world serving as the Word-Bearer's home, presents yet another variation on the theme of chaos-controlled planets. Beneath skies of fire and blood, the entire world stands covered by vast sprawling cathedrals, temples, and monuments dedicated to worshipping the ruinous powers. From this central location, the Dark Council of veteran Dark Apostles directs the Word-Bearers Legion in their ongoing mission to corrupt the Imperium from within. They sponsor chaos cults and witches' covens across the galaxy, patient conspirators working to undermine Imperial authority in preparation for eventual conquest. The slave populations on Sicarus serve primarily religious functions, forming enormous congregations that worship at the countless shrines and temples. They participate in ceremonies that last for days, chanting prayers to dark gods until their voices give out and their bodies collapse from exhaustion. They make offerings of their own blood, opening veins to fill sacred vessels. They witness rituals that should break mortal minds, watching as demons manifest through the immolated bodies of their fellow slaves. Some embrace this existence fully, becoming true believers who see their suffering as service to powers greater than the Imperium ever represented. Others maintain the pretense of faith while quietly longing for death, knowing that rebellion would only result in more elaborate torments. The Word-Bearers view their slaves as instruments for worship, tools to generate the psychic energy that feeds the Chaos Gods. They cultivate faith through brutal means, punishing any who show insufficient devotion with creative tortures. Yet they also reward the most fervent believers, elevating chosen individuals to positions of authority over their fellow slaves, or granting them the dubious privilege of becoming willing sacrifice. This creates hierarchies within the slave populations, with those who demonstrate greatest zeal receiving marginally better treatment, while those who doubt suffer most severely. Across all demon worlds, regardless of which chaos god holds dominance, certain patterns emerge that define the existence of mortal populations. They live without hope of salvation or escape. The Imperium views demon worlds as lost causes, places so thoroughly corrupted that even exterminators might fail to purge them fully. Rescue missions never come for those trapped in the Eye of Terror or similar warp-saturated regions. The slaves understand this at some level, even if their masters never state it explicitly. They know themselves abandoned by the Imperium that once claimed to protect humanity across the galaxy. This knowledge shapes their psychology in profound ways. Some embrace chaos fully, seeing it as their only path to power or meaning in lives otherwise destined for anonymous suffering. They compete for their master's attention, hoping that exceptional service might earn them transformation into something more than merely human. They inform on their fellow slaves, turning betrayal into an art form in hopes of securing tiny advantages. They volunteer for the most dangerous assignments, accepting terrible risks in exchange for the possibility of reward. These individuals often rise to become chaos champions themselves, leading warbands in raids against Imperial space or ruling over their own domains of suffering. Others maintain some fragment of resistance, clinging to memories of better times or hope for divine intervention. They whisper prayers to the Emperor in darkness, knowing such devotion would mean death if discovered. They form secret bonds with fellow slaves, creating communities of shared suffering where small acts of kindness become acts of defiance against the corruption surrounding them. They preserve traditions and stories from before the fall, passing them to children who may never see anything beyond the nightmare world of their birth. These individuals die slowly, ground down by the relentless horror of their existence, until nothing remains but exhausted shells going through the motions of survival. Most slaves, however, exist in a state between these extremes, neither fully embracing chaos nor maintaining meaningful resistance. They simply endure day after day, performing whatever tasks their masters demand without thought beyond immediate survival. The corrupting energies of demon worlds work on them gradually, eroding their humanity through constant exposure. Their bodies mutate slowly, developing minor changes that accumulate over time. These changes happen slowly enough that individuals often fail to notice until they've progressed significantly. The psychological corruption proceeds even more insidiously. Prolonged exposure to the warp's influence degrades mental stability in ways that make traditional madness seem merciful by comparison. Slaves begin hearing voices that speak in tongues they shouldn't understand yet somehow do. Over time, the boundary between their thoughts and the psychic noise surrounding them begins to blur until they can no longer distinguish their own desires from those implanted by external forces. Children born on demon worlds face perhaps the cruelest fate of all, knowing nothing but corruption from their first breath. They grow up accepting horror as normal, their young minds unable to conceptualize alternatives to the nightmare surrounding them. Parents try to shield them when possible, but such protection rarely lasts long. Those who show promise might receive training for specialized roles. The rest join the anonymous masses, their individual identities irrelevant to masters who view them as interchangeable resources. The educational systems on demon worlds, such as they exist, focus entirely on indoctrination and practical skills. Children learn to worship the appropriate chaos god from their earliest years, the prayers and rituals becoming as natural as breathing. They learn whatever technical or combat skills their future roles demand. What they never learn is anything that might encourage independent thought or moral reasoning. Some demon worlds maintain breeding programs where human reproduction occurs under controlled conditions designed to produce specific outcomes. Women are kept perpetually pregnant, their bodies stressed beyond natural limits by sorcery and drugs that accelerate gestation. Children are separated from mothers at birth, sorted according to potential usefulness, and raised in communal facilities where attachment to specific individuals cannot form. The most disturbing aspect of such programs lies in attempts to breed humans with specific chaos mutations built into their genetic code. Dark tech priests and sorcerers collaborate on projects that blend forbidden science with warpcraft, seeking to create populations naturally attuned to specific aspects of chaos. The failure rate remains extraordinarily high, with most products of such breeding either dying in infancy or emerging so warped that they serve only as cautionary examples. Transportation between demon worlds within the Eye of Terror and other warp-saturated regions occurs with disturbing frequency, as chaos forces move slaves and resources according to shifting strategic needs. These journeys represent ordeals in their own right, with thousands packed into the holds of ships never designed for passenger transport. The conditions rival those of the demon worlds themselves, cramped spaces where disease spreads rapidly and the weak die within days. The ships that transport slaves bear their own corruptions, vessels that have served chaos for centuries or millennia. Their machine spirits have long since been corrupted or replaced by bound demons that pilot the craft according to twisted logic. Some vessels have been modified specifically for the slave trade, their holds transformed into vast pens where human cargo can be stored with maximum efficiency and minimum concern for comfort or dignity. Upon arrival at their destinations, slaves disembark to face new horrors tailored to whatever world claims them. Those sent to mining operations descend into depths where darkness presses against feeble lights like a living thing. Those assigned to construction projects labor under alien suns that burn or freeze according to local conditions. Those designated for military training enter camps where weakness means death, and strength earns only the opportunity to die in service to the dark gods. The sorting process occurs quickly, overseers making snap judgments based on appearance and brief assessments of capability. Appeals and pleas fall on ears long since deadened to such displays. The treatment of slaves varies somewhat depending on which faction of chaos controls a given world. The traitor legions, particularly those who retain some organizational discipline from their origins as space marines, often maintain more systematic approaches to slave management. They understand logistics and resource allocation, applying principles learned during their service to the Imperium toward the efficient exploitation of human resources. The Iron Warriors exemplify this approach, running their slave populations with mechanical precision that maximizes output while maintaining just enough care to prevent catastrophic losses that would disrupt operations. Other warbands and chaos champions prove far more capricious in their treatment of slaves, subject to whims that change as frequently as their mood. A slave might receive rewards one day for performing exactly the same actions that earn brutal punishment the next, the inconsistency itself serving as a form of psychological torment. Some chaos leaders actively cultivate uncertainty and fear among their slaves, believing that destabilized populations prove easier to control and more susceptible to corruption. They stage random executions, implement contradictory rules, and encouraged slaves to inform on each other, creating environments of paranoia where trust cannot exist. The Dark Mechanicus approaches slave management with particular cruelty, viewing human bodies primarily as raw materials for their grotesque experiments and industrial processes. They augment slaves with crude cybernetics that cause constant pain but enhance work capacity. They conduct vivisections on living subjects to better understand human physiology and test new augmentation techniques. They blend human tissue with machinery and demonic essence, creating hybrids that retain just enough awareness to understand their fate while lacking any agency to resist. The screams that echo through hell forges often come not from tortured slaves but from the half-living machines those slaves have become. The demon princes who rule many worlds within the Eye of Terror treat their mortal populations as playthings, subject to whims that reflect their particular obsessions and the nature of their patron gods. They possess power that makes resistance futile for unaugmented humans. They reshape their worlds through will alone, manifesting their desires directly into reality through the warp's influence. A demon prince displeased with a slave's performance might transform that individual into a pillar of screaming stone, serving as both punishment and warning to others. Yet even in these nightmare realms, patterns of behavior emerge among slave populations that demonstrate humanity's persistent adaptability. Underground economies develop where slaves trade scraps of food, makeshift tools, or information. Social hierarchies form based on factors like strength, cunning, or access to resources. These social structures exist beneath the notice of most chaos overseers, who care nothing for how slaves organize themselves, so long as work gets done and worship continues. Some slaves acquire specialized knowledge that makes them more valuable to their masters, earning marginal improvements in treatment. Those who learn to repair machinery become essential to hellforges and fortress worlds. Those who demonstrate skill at organizing labor details rise to overseer positions where they enjoy slightly better conditions, while bearing the burden of ensuring quotas are met. Those who show aptitude for the occult might be trained as cultist priests, leading worship services and conducting minor rituals under the supervision of Chaos Space Marines or sorcerers. These roles offer no escape from the fundamental horror of existence on demon worlds, but they provide slight buffering against the worst extremes of suffering. The concept of time loses coherence on many demon worlds, particularly those deep within the Eye of Terror, where the warp's influence runs strongest. Slaves might experience subjective decades while objective time measures only years, or vice versa. They age at inconsistent rates, sometimes growing old overnight or discovering themselves mysteriously rejuvenated. Memories become unreliable, infected by false experiences implanted through psychic means. The past blurs into an indistinct haze where slaves cannot remember their lives before captivity. The present extends eternally, each moment of suffering feeling like it lasts forever. The future ceases to exist as a meaningful concept, since nothing ever changes except to become worse. This temporal distortion serves multiple purposes for chaos. It disorients slaves, making organized resistance nearly impossible when individuals cannot reliably coordinate their actions. It extends suffering beyond normal human lifespans, allowing a single generation of captives to provide centuries of service from their perspective. Most insidiously, it erodes the mental markers that allow humans to maintain stable identities over time, gradually dissolving the sense of self that makes individuals distinct from the collective mass of suffering humanity. Religious belief among demon world slaves takes complex forms that blend corruption with desperation. Some worship the chaos gods genuinely, having been broken so thoroughly that they see their tormentors as rightful masters deserving devotion. Others maintain pretense of faith while clinging secretly to memories of the Emperor and the Imperial Creed. Though 10,000 years of darkness have rendered the Emperor's light dim and distant, still others develop syncretic beliefs that attempt to reconcile their old faith with the undeniable reality of chaos, telling themselves that perhaps the Emperor fights the dark gods from within the warp itself, and their suffering serves his mysterious plans. The fate awaiting slaves on demon worlds admits no possibility of redemption or rescue. The Imperium lacks both the capability and the will to mount liberation campaigns into warp-saturated regions, where even victory would come at costs that might doom entire sectors. The few Imperial forces that do venture into such places come as raiders or reconnaissance teams, focused on intelligence gathering or targeted strikes rather than mass evacuations. They cannot save the populations trapped on demon worlds, since most such individuals have been corrupted beyond any hope of recovery. Upon arrival at their destinations, slaves disembark to face new horrors tailored to whatever world claims them. Those sent to mining operations descend into depths where darkness presses against feeble lights like a living thing. Those assigned to construction projects labour under alien suns that burn or freeze according to local conditions. Those designated for military training enter camps where weakness means death and strength earns only the opportunity to die in service to the dark gods. The sorting process occurs quickly, overseers making snap judgments based on appearance and brief assessments of capability. The treatment of slaves varies somewhat depending on which faction of chaos controls a given world. The traitor legions, particularly those who retain some organisational discipline from their origins as space marines, often maintain more systematic approaches to slave management. They understand logistics and resource allocation, applying principles learned during their service to the Imperium toward the efficient exploitation of human resources. The Iron Warriors exemplify this approach, running their slave populations with mechanical precision that maximizes output while maintaining just enough care to prevent catastrophic losses that would disrupt operations. Other warbands and chaos champions prove far more capricious in their treatment of slaves, subject to whims that change as frequently as their moods. A slave might receive rewards one day for performing exactly the same actions that earn brutal punishment the next, the inconsistency itself serving as a form of psychological torment. Some chaos leaders actively cultivate uncertainty and fear among their slaves, believing that destabilized populations prove easier to control and more susceptible to corruption. They stage random executions, implement contradictory rules, and encourage slaves to inform on each other, creating environments of paranoia where trust cannot exist. The Dark Mechanicus approaches slave management with particular cruelty, viewing human bodies primarily as raw materials for their grotesque experiments and industrial processes. They augment slaves with crude cybernetics that cause constant pain but enhance work capacity. They conduct vivisections on living subjects to better understand human physiology and test new augmentation techniques. They blend human tissue with machinery and demonic essence, creating hybrids that retain just enough awareness to understand their fate while lacking any agency to resist. The screams that echo through hellforges often come not from tortured slaves, but from the half-living machines those slaves have become. Some slaves acquire specialized knowledge that makes them more valuable to their masters, earning marginal improvements in treatment. Those who learn to repair machinery become essential to hellforges and fortress worlds. Those who demonstrate skill at organizing labor details rise to overseer positions where they enjoy slightly better conditions while bearing the burden of ensuring quotas are met. Those who show aptitude for the occult might be trained as cultist priests, leading worship services and conducting minor rituals under the supervision of chaos space marines or sorcerers. These roles offer no escape from the fundamental horror of existence on demon worlds, but they provide slight buffering against the worst extremes of suffering. The overseers who rise from slave ranks occupy positions of particular moral complexity. They understand intimately the suffering they inflict, having endured it themselves before earning promotion through competence or ruthlessness. Some rationalize their actions as necessary for survival, telling themselves they minimize harm where possible while maintaining the appearance of loyalty to their chaos masters. Others embrace their roles enthusiastically, transforming from victims into perpetrators with disturbing ease. The power dynamic shifts completely once they gain authority over fellow slaves, and many discover capacities for cruelty they never suspected within themselves. These overseers serve as intermediaries between the slave masses and their chaos masters, translating commands downward and reporting results upward. They walk a precarious line, needing to maintain productivity while avoiding actions that might draw unwanted attention from those above. Failure to meet quotas results in their demotion back to the ranks they clawed their way out of, or execution as examples. Success brings marginally better rations, slightly safer sleeping quarters, and the knowledge that they've temporarily secured their position. Yet even the most successful overseers understand the fundamental instability of their situation. They remain slaves who've simply been granted longer leashes. The psychological toll of serving as an overseer proves devastating in ways different from ordinary slavery. Common slaves can blame their suffering on external forces, maintaining some sense of innocence or victimhood, Overseers lack this comfort, forced to confront their own complicity in perpetuating the system that once victimized them. Some descend into nihilism, deciding that if meaning cannot be found in their circumstances, then cruelty becomes as valid as kindness. Others develop elaborate mental frameworks that redefine their actions as somehow noble or necessary, convincing themselves they serve a greater purpose. A few maintain awareness of the horror they participate in, but continue regardless, having concluded that survival justifies any compromise. The word-bearers prove particularly adept at exploiting this dynamic, cultivating entire hierarchies of slave priests who sincerely believe in the divinity of the chaos gods. These individuals preach with genuine conviction, having undergone psychological conditioning that rewired their fundamental values. They lead worship services where thousands gather to chant prayers that feed demonic entities. They identify potential new converts among the slave populations, marking them for special indoctrination. They conduct sacrifices with ceremonial precision, their hands steady as they offer up lives to powers they've come to revere. The word-bearers recognize that true believers serve more effectively than those merely acting under threat, and so invest considerable effort in creating them. The process of creating such believers involves breaking down existing identity structures and rebuilding them around chaos worship. Candidates undergo isolation, sensory deprivation, and exposure to carefully orchestrated experiences designed to overwhelm rational thought. They're shown visions through forced psychic contact, made to witness manifestations of demonic power that seem to validate chaos theology. They're rewarded for expressions of faith and punished for doubt, creating feedback loops that reinforce desired thought patterns. Those who resist too strongly are discarded, but many eventually succumb, their minds reorganizing around the new framework imposed upon them. Once converted, these individuals often prove more fanatical than those born into chaos worship. Having made the transition from imperial faith to chaos devotion, they feel compelled to justify that transformation through extreme displays of commitment. They volunteer for the most dangerous missions, accepting risks that even Chaos Space Marines might hesitate to take. They compete to demonstrate superior devotion, trying to outperform their peers in acts of worship and service. The word-bearers encourage this competition, knowing it generates the psychic energy that fuels their patron gods, while also serving practical purposes by motivating their slave populations. Beyond the word-bearers' theological approach, other traitor legions develop their own methods for extracting maximum utility from slave populations. The Night Lords specialize in fear as a control mechanism, maintaining their slaves through constant terror rather than physical restraints. They stage elaborate displays of torture and execution, ensuring every slave understands the consequences of disobedience. They cultivate informant networks where slaves betray each other in hopes of avoiding punishment themselves. They operate in darkness when possible, using their enhanced senses to move unseen while their slaves huddle in paranoid clusters. This approach requires less direct supervision than other methods, but creates populations too traumatized to function effectively in complex tasks. The Emperor's children, devoted to Slaanesh, treat their slaves as components in elaborate artistic endeavors that blur the lines between beauty and horror. They arrange mass performances where thousands of slaves participate in choreographed displays meant to generate specific aesthetic and emotional responses. They experiment with chemical compounds and surgical modifications designed to heighten sensation in their subjects, treating human nervous systems as instruments to be tuned. They stage competitions where slaves must please their masters through displays of talent or submission, with winners receiving rewards that often prove as horrifying as the punishments losers endure. The entire slave population becomes part of a living artwork dedicated to excess. The Alpha Legion employs slaves in ways consistent with their preference for infiltration and manipulation. Rather than maintaining obvious slave populations on demon worlds, they insert corrupted individuals back into Imperial society as sleeper agents. These unfortunates undergo conditioning that allows them to function normally until activated by specific triggers, at which point they execute predetermined instructions regardless of personal cost. Some carry biological or psychic contagions designed to spread corruption. Others gather intelligence for future Alpha Legion operations. Many never activate at all, living out their lives unaware of the programming buried in their minds. This approach represents a more subtle form of slavery, no less terrible for being invisible to most observers. The Death Guard's plague-ridden domains present unique challenges for slave management, since the diseases that saturate these worlds would normally prove fatal to unaugmented humans within hours or days. The solution involves deliberate infection with specific Nurgle-blessed plagues that, rather than killing, transform victims into carriers who can survive in the toxic environment. These slaves experience constant low-level suffering as their bodies host countless parasites and diseases. Yet Nurgle's gifts numb them to much of the pain. They shamble through their tasks with disturbing contentment, their minds too degraded to comprehend their degradation. Many develop genuine affection for Grandfather Nurgle, grateful for the release from fear and the sense of belonging his diseases provide. The Thousand Sons maintain slave populations on the planet of the sorcerers and worlds throughout their sphere of influence, using these mortals as test subjects for sorcerous experiments. Captives find themselves subjected to rituals designed to probe the limits of mortal souls, their psyches dissected and examined through methods that leave them fundamentally altered. Those with latent psychic potential receive special attention, their abilities forcibly awakened and shaped according to the Thousand Sons' needs. Many become Zangors through a transformation process that replaces human flesh with avian hybrid characteristics. Others undergo mutations that reshape them into forms suitable for specific purposes, their biology responding to sorcerous manipulation in ways that defy natural law. The Black Legion, largest and most diverse of the traitor forces, maintains slave populations across numerous demon worlds and conquered territories. As an organization that welcomes renegades from all sources, the Black Legion demonstrates considerable variation in how different warbands treat their slaves. Some follow the traditions of their original legions, while others develop unique approaches influenced by their commanders' personalities or the demands of specific missions. This inconsistency means slaves in Black Legion territories face unpredictable fates, never knowing whether their next master will prove merely brutal or inventively cruel. Regardless of which Chaos faction controls them, all slave populations share certain commonalities born from their circumstances. They develop coping mechanisms that allow them to endure conditions that would break unaccustomed minds. They learn to recognize mood shifts in their masters, adjusting their behavior to minimize danger. They form informal support networks where possible, sharing resources and information despite the risks such cooperation entails. They tell themselves stories about eventual escape or divine intervention, clinging to hopes they know intellectually to be false but emotionally need to maintain sanity. They count time in small increments rather than years, finding ways to celebrate minor victories or milestones that give structure to otherwise meaningless existence. The children raised in these environments develop psychological profiles distinct from both their parents and ordinary humans. They display heightened survival instincts, quickly learning to read threats and opportunities in their surroundings. They form attachments differently, understanding from early age that everyone around them could die at any moment. They accept violence and suffering as normal parts of life, reacting to atrocities with pragmatic assessment rather than horror. Some develop almost preternatural emotional control, hiding their feelings behind masks that reveal nothing to potentially hostile observers. Others swing wildly between emotional extremes, their regulatory systems damaged by constant stress. All carry trauma that shapes them profoundly, though they often lack vocabulary to articulate their pain. As these children mature into adults on demon worlds, they face choices about who they'll become within the limited options available. Some embrace chaos fully, seeing it as the only path to power or meaning. They compete aggressively for advancement, willing to betray anyone to improve their positions. They volunteer for dangerous assignments, calculating that the risks of action beat the certainty of stagnation. They cultivate useful skills, making themselves valuable enough that their masters might protect them as investments. A few succeed in rising above slave status entirely, becoming chaos champions or cultist leaders with authority over others. Most simply die in the attempt, ground down by competition, or killed in the hazardous work they volunteered for. Others choose different paths, maintaining internal resistance even as they perform required tasks. They form secret communities bound by shared values preserved from before the fall. They teach children stories about better worlds and nobler purposes, passing down cultural memories that chaos would prefer to erase. They engage in small acts of sabotage when possible, accepting that individual actions accomplish little, but maintaining sense of agency through defiance. They help each other survive, sharing resources and warnings even when doing so brings no personal benefit. These individuals live with constant awareness that discovery means death, yet continue their resistance because surrender feels worse than annihilation. The vast majority, however, exist in grey areas between these extremes. They cooperate with chaos when necessary and resist when safe. They form genuine attachments to fellow slaves while remaining ready to betray them if survival demands it. They maintain vestigial moral frameworks while acknowledging those frameworks have become mostly irrelevant to their circumstances. They hope without believing their hopes can be fulfilled, and despair without surrendering completely to that despair. They endure because humans possess remarkable capacity for endurance, adapting to circumstances that should destroy them and finding ways to continue existing, even in environments designed to break their spirits. The question of whether slaves on demon worlds can truly be considered human remains subject to theological and philosophical debate within what remains of the Imperium. The Inquisition generally holds that exposure to chaos corruption fundamentally alters individuals at the soul level, rendering them beyond redemption regardless of whether they chose their circumstances. This doctrine justifies the policy of never attempting rescues of those trapped on demon worlds, since even if physically saved, they would carry corruption back into Imperial space. The Adeptus Ministorum supports this position, preaching that chaos taint spreads like disease and must be purged without mercy or hesitation. Some Imperial factions take more nuanced positions, acknowledging degrees of corruption and possibility of redemption under specific circumstances. Certain Space Marine chapters, particularly those who faced chaos corruption within their own ranks, recognize that not all who touch chaos become irrevocably damned. They point to examples of individuals who resisted demonic influence or returned from the edge of damnation through strength of will and faith in the Emperor. These chapters argue for case-by-case evaluation rather than blanket condemnation, though they remain minority voices within the broader Imperial hierarchy. The practical difficulties of such evaluation, requiring extensive testing and observation of individuals who might be corrupted sleeper agents, limit implementation of more merciful policies. The reality proves more complex than either absolutist position acknowledges. Some individuals trapped on demon worlds maintain their essential humanity, despite years of exposure to corruption. They resist internal changes through sheer stubborn will, clinging to core values even as everything around them works to erode those values. They form communities of resistance that preserve human culture and dignity in impossible circumstances. When rare rescue opportunities arise, these individuals often prove capable of reintegrating into Imperial society, though they carry psychological scars that never fully heal. Their existence demonstrates that chaos corruption, while powerful, does not inevitably consume everyone it touches. Others succumb completely, transformed so thoroughly that nothing recognizably human remains. Their thoughts align perfectly with chaos, their desires matching those of the dark gods they serve. They feel genuine joy in causing suffering, authentic pleasure in acts that would horrify their former selves. The corruption has rewritten them at fundamental levels, replacing human psychology with something alien wearing human skin. These individuals cannot be saved because nothing remains to save. The person they were has been destroyed as completely as if they died, replaced by something new that happens to occupy the same body. Most fall somewhere between these extremes, partially corrupted in ways that leave them functioning but changed. They retain fragments of their previous selves while incorporating elements of chaos into their identity. They might still love their children while also participating in rituals that would have horrified them before their fall. They remember being people who valued mercy and compassion, even as they commit cruelties necessary for survival. The contradiction generates constant internal tension that some resolve by fragmenting their personalities, creating separate modes for different contexts. Others simply learn to live with the dissonance, accepting they've become something neither wholly human nor fully claimed by chaos. The Imperium's blanket condemnation of all demon world survivors reflects practical necessity more than theological precision. Attempting to sort genuinely salvageable individuals from corrupted ones would require resources the Imperium cannot spare and expertise too rare to deploy widely. The risk of allowing corrupted individuals into Imperial space, where they might spread chaos influence or serve as vectors for demonic manifestation, outweighs potential benefits of saving the few who might be redeemed. This cold calculus consigns millions to fates they might have escaped under different circumstances, but Imperial leadership views such sacrifice as necessary for humanity's broader survival. This policy creates profound moral dilemmas for Imperial forces who encounter slave populations during raids into Chaos territory. Individual soldiers and space marines sometimes recognize that the terrified humans they're ordered to execute pose no real threat, yet must follow commands regardless. Some develop elaborate justifications for these actions, convincing themselves that a quick death represents mercy compared to continued existence under Chaos rule. Others simply compartmentalize, refusing to think too deeply about the implications of their orders. A few break under the strain, unable to reconcile their actions with their understanding of what the Imperium supposedly represents. These individuals often face judgment themselves, their crisis of conscience treated as potential corruption requiring investigation. The rare instances where Imperial forces do attempt to extract slaves from demon worlds typically end in tragedy. Rescued individuals often prove psychologically incapable of adjusting to life in Imperial society, their worldviews too shaped by their experiences to allow reintegration. They struggle with simple social interactions, unable to trust others or follow rules that seem arbitrary compared to the brutal simplicity of survival under Chaos. Some attempt to spread Chaos worship among their rescuers, either because they've been genuinely corrupted, or because they've come to believe the Dark Gods represent realistic alternatives to the Imperium's failings. Others simply cannot cope with freedom, their identities so thoroughly built around slavery that autonomy proves overwhelming. Many choose suicide rather than face the challenges of adapting to new circumstances. Even successful reintegrations remain partial at best. Former demon world slaves carry trauma that manifests in unpredictable ways throughout their remaining lives. They suffer nightmares that blur memory with hallucination, never certain which horrors they remember actually occurred. They experience flashbacks triggered by mundane stimuli, suddenly transported mentally back to their captivity. They struggle to form meaningful relationships, having learned to trust no one completely. They see threats everywhere, their survival instincts calibrated for environments far more dangerous than Imperial worlds. Mental health services, limited even in the best Imperial facilities, prove inadequate for addressing the depth of their damage. The Inquisition monitors all rescued demon world slaves with obsessive attention, watching for any sign of latent corruption. These unfortunates live under constant surveillance, their actions observed and their associations tracked. They face regular interrogations disguised as wellness checks, inquisitors probing for evidence of Chaos taint. Any deviation from expected behavior draws immediate investigation. This surveillance creates its own psychological burden, preventing the privacy and autonomy necessary for genuine healing. Many rescued slaves conclude they've simply traded one form of captivity for another, exchanging Chaos masters for Imperial overseers who trust them no more than their former owners did. The few who manage to build new lives within this framework often find purpose in service to the Imperium, channeling their experiences toward useful ends. Some become advisors to Imperial military forces planning operations against Chaos targets, their knowledge of demon world conditions proving invaluable for mission planning. Others join the Inquisition itself, using their understanding of corruption to identify and counter Chaos infiltration. A handful become preachers, warning Imperial citizens about the horrors awaiting those who stray from the Emperor's light. These roles allow them to transform their suffering into something meaningful, while also placing them under continued observation by authorities who never fully trust them. The matter of demon worlds serves as grim reminder of Chaos's threat to humanity. Each world claimed by the ruinous powers represents not merely territory lost, but populations enslaved and corrupted. The billions trapped on these nightmare realms live lives of unrelenting horror, their suffering generating psychic energy that feeds the very entities responsible for their torment. They build monuments to dark gods with their own hands, worship powers that view them as disposable resources, and participate in systems designed to perpetuate misery. Their agency has been stripped away through a combination of physical coercion, psychological manipulation, and spiritual corruption that leaves them unable to imagine alternatives to their circumstances. The Imperium's inability or unwillingness to mount rescue operations means these populations remain abandoned to their fates. Whatever promises the Emperor made about protecting humanity across the galaxy have been rendered void for those trapped beyond the reach of Imperial power. They exist in a state of permanent abandonment, knowing no help will come and that their suffering will continue until death provides the only escape. This knowledge shapes their psychology profoundly, eliminating hope as a meaningful concept and replacing it with grim acceptance of their condition. Yet even in such circumstances, some maintain defiance. They whisper prayers to the Emperor in darkness, risking everything to maintain connection to a faith they can barely remember. They sabotage chaos operations in small ways, accepting that their actions accomplish little, but maintaining their sense of self through resistance. They protect each other when possible, forming bonds of genuine care and mutual support despite the dangers such connections entail. They preserve stories and traditions from before the fall, passing cultural memory to children who may never see the worlds those stories describe. These acts of resistance accomplish nothing strategic, change no outcomes, threaten no chaos strongholds, yet they matter immensely to those who perform them, representing the stubborn insistence that humanity retains value even when reduced to slavery under demonic rule. The children of demon worlds present particular tragedy, born into circumstances they never chose and denied any possibility of normal development. They grow up surrounded by horror, their earliest memories involving violence and deprivation. They learn to worship dark gods before learning to read or write. They understand fear and suffering intimately, but may never experience genuine safety or unconditional love. Their potential remains forever stunted by their environment, talents that might have flourished in better circumstances instead channeled toward mere survival. The question of whether they bear responsibility for later becoming willing chaos servants proves unanswerable, their choices so constrained by circumstance that the concept of free will becomes nearly meaningless. Some argue that these children represent chaos's most effective weapon against the Imperium, creating generations raised with no loyalty to the Emperor or memory of anything beyond corruption. As these individuals mature, they become willing participants in chaos activities, their worldview shaped entirely by the nightmare environments that raised them. They raid Imperial worlds without moral qualms, seeing nothing wrong with inflicting on others what was inflicted on them. They worship the chaos gods with genuine devotion, having known nothing else. They perpetuate the system that victimized them, unable to imagine alternatives because alternatives were deliberately kept from them. In this way, chaos sustains itself through its victims, creating self-perpetuating cycles of corruption that span generations. The demon worlds scattered throughout the Eye of Terror and beyond the Great Rift represent permanent stains on reality, places where the material universe has been so thoroughly corrupted that restoration seems impossible. Exterminatus, the Imperium's ultimate sanction for hopelessly compromised worlds, often proves ineffective against demon worlds due to the warp's influence making them resistant to conventional destruction. The taint runs too deep, worked into the fundamental structure of these places at levels beyond mere physical contamination. Even if somehow purged of all life and scoured clean by cyclonic torpedoes, the psychic resonance would remain, drawing chaos back eventually. The strategic implications of this permanence trouble Imperial commanders who understand the long-term calculus. Each world lost to chaos becomes a permanent asset for the ruinous powers, a base from which to launch raids and invasions into Imperial space. The slave populations provide labour for constructing war machines and soldiers for filling out chaos armies. The demon world itself serves as a manifestation point where entities from the warp can enter reality more easily than elsewhere. The cumulative effect of losing multiple worlds creates networks of chaos-controlled territory that become increasingly difficult to counter. The Eye of Terror demonstrates this pattern on massive scale, an entire region of space transformed into chaos domain from which the traitor legions have launched attacks for 10,000 years. The Great Rift's creation expanded this problem exponentially, splitting the galaxy and creating vast new regions where chaos influence runs strong. Worlds that maintained loyalty to the Imperium for millennia found themselves suddenly isolated in warp-saturated zones where demonic incursion became commonplace. Some fell quickly. Overwhelmed by invasions they lacked resources to counter. Others held out for decades before succumbing, their populations slowly corrupted by proximity to the warp. A few managed to maintain their defiance despite circumstances, becoming islands of Imperial control in seas of chaos corruption. The fate of these holdout worlds remains uncertain, their long-term survival doubtful absent major shifts in the strategic situation. The slaves on these newly fallen worlds face particularly cruel transitions, having known imperial rule within living memory. They remember when their worlds obeyed laws that, however harsh, maintained some semblance of order and justice. They recall times when worship of the Emperor provided comfort rather than the mockery chaos makes of faith. They know what was lost, making their current suffering more acute than for those born into chaos service. These populations often retain stronger resistance to corruption, their recent memories of alternative ways of living providing psychological armour against complete submission. Yet time erodes such resistance, especially for children who grow up knowing chaos rule as normal, despite their parents' stories about better days. The Imperium's Indomitus Crusade launched following the resurrection of Primarch Rubaut Guilliman, aimed partly to reclaim worlds lost to chaos during the Great Rift's opening. This massive military effort achieved significant successes, liberating numerous systems and re-establishing imperial control across regions that had fallen into darkness. Yet even successful liberation campaigns often arrived too late to save the populations they purported to rescue. The slaves discovered on reclaimed worlds typically proved too corrupted for reintegration, requiring execution as mercy rather than welcoming as liberated citizens. The worlds themselves often bore corruption so deep that simple reconquest proved insufficient, requiring years or decades of purification before they could again safely host human populations. Such liberations present moral quandaries that imperial commanders struggle to resolve. The soldiers who fight to reclaim these worlds expect to save imperial citizens, only to discover they must execute everyone they find. The distinction between freeing a population and simply replacing one overlord with another becomes uncomfortably blurred. Some commanders attempt to sort salvageable individuals from corrupted ones, creating triage systems that evaluate slaves case by case. Others default to wholesale execution, concluding that the risks of showing mercy outweigh potential benefits. Neither approach feels adequate to the situation's complexity, yet necessity demands decisions be made quickly with imperfect information. The long-term fate of demon worlds remains one of the great unsolved problems facing the Imperium. Traditional military conquest proves insufficient because physical control of territory accomplishes little when the corruption exists at deeper levels. Spiritual purification campaigns led by the Adeptus Ministorum sometimes show limited success, but sustaining such efforts long enough to achieve complete cleansing requires resources the Imperium rarely possesses. The Inquisition's Ordo Malleus specializes in combating demonic threats, yet even they acknowledge that reclaiming demon worlds represents challenges beyond their capability to fully address. Some theorize that only the Emperor himself, should he somehow recover from his millennia of immobility, could command power sufficient to restore such places to uncorrupted states. The study of demon worlds occupies significant attention among imperial scholars despite the risks such research entails. Understanding how chaos corrupts worlds and enslaves populations might reveal weaknesses to exploit or methods to prevent future losses. Yet such studies inevitably expose researchers to corrupting influences, as the knowledge itself carries taint that affects those who pursue it too deeply. The Ordo Malleus maintains extensive records about demon worlds, carefully guarded to prevent unauthorized access while remaining available to those with legitimate need. These records document the fates of thousands of worlds across millennia, painting a comprehensive picture of chaos's methodologies and the varied forms corruption takes. Certain patterns emerge from this accumulated knowledge. Worlds fall to chaos through predictable pathways that, if recognized early, might be interrupted before corruption becomes irreversible. The presence of hidden chaos cults represents the most common precursor, their activities weakening imperial authority and preparing populations psychologically for open rebellion. Psycho manifestations increase as the boundary between reality and warp grows thin, with untrained individuals serving as unwitting gateways for demonic incursion. Signs of mutation appear in human and animal populations, reflecting warp energies beginning to affect biological processes. These warning signs, properly identified and acted upon, allow for interventions that might save worlds from falling. Yet the Imperium's vast size and limited resources mean many such warnings go unrecognized until too late. The question of whether demon worlds could theoretically be reclaimed and purified remains subject to debate. Some theologians argue that chaos corruption proves permanent and irreversible, that worlds once claimed by the ruinous powers remain forever lost to humanity. They point to the Eye of Terror's 10,000-year persistence as evidence that demon worlds do not simply revert to normal states when left alone. Others maintain more optimistic positions, suggesting that with sufficient faith and firepower, even the most corrupted places might be cleansed. They reference rare instances where heavily tainted worlds were successfully purified through sustained inquisitorial effort combined with massive military operations. The truth likely falls between these extremes, with some demon worlds potentially reclaimable, while others have passed beyond any hope of recovery. The slaves trapped on these worlds understand nothing of such debates. They lack access to the strategic and theological discussions occurring in distant imperial councils. Their concerns remain focused entirely on immediate survival, on enduring one more day in conditions designed to break them. They think not about whether their worlds might someday be liberated, but about whether they'll survive until the next meal, whether their children will see tomorrow, whether the pain will ever stop. The grand questions of chaos's nature and humanity's fate against it remain abstractions irrelevant to their daily struggles. They exist in an eternal present defined entirely by suffering, unable to think beyond their immediate circumstances because such thinking serves no practical purpose. Yet their existence matters immensely to the broader conflict between Imperium and Chaos. Every slave who maintains some fragment of resistance represents a small victory against corruption. Every parent who teaches children about the Emperor, despite mortal danger, keeps alive knowledge that Chaos would prefer extinguished. Every secret act of sabotage, however minor, demonstrates that human will cannot be completely broken. These individual acts aggregate into larger patterns of resistance that complicate Chaos's plans and slow its advance. While strategic calculations focus on armies and fleets, on Space Marine chapters and Imperial Guard regiments, the unnamed billions suffering on demon worlds wage their own war through simple persistence in remaining recognizably human, despite everything working to strip that humanity away. The horror of demon worlds lies not merely in the physical suffering inflicted on their populations, but in the spiritual degradation such places represent. They demonstrate what becomes of humanity when separated from the Emperor's light and delivered into Chaos's grasp. They show the ultimate endpoint of corruption, the final form that human civilization takes when all restraining influences are removed and the basest impulses given free rein. They serve as warnings about the fragility of order and the ease with which it can collapse into nightmare. Every Imperial citizen aware of Demon World's existence carries knowledge that similar fate could befall their own world should Chaos gain foothold. This fear serves useful purpose, motivating vigilance against corruption and strengthening resolve to resist any compromise with the ruinous powers. The slaves themselves rarely understand their symbolic significance. They know only their own suffering, unable to contextualize it within broader cosmic struggles. They do not think of themselves as examples or warnings, but simply as individuals trying to survive impossible circumstances. Yet their suffering carries meaning beyond their personal experience, representing the stakes of humanity's war against Chaos. Should the Imperium fail completely, should Chaos triumph across the galaxy, their fate would become universal. All of humanity would live as they live, enslaved and corrupted, reduced to resources-serving entities that view them with less regard than humans show livestock. The demon worlds provide glimpses of that potential future, making manifest what awaits should eternal vigilance falter.